Hey everybody, this is Khara Brindle, co-founder of the empowerment model of supervision and co-owner of Supervisionary. I have a special guest with us today. This is Chris, fellow supervisor. Hi, Chris.
Hello. Hi.
We're here to do a role play, which is always exciting. People are always asking us for role plays within Supervisionary, and this role play is what it looks like to have that first meeting for supervision. So you've already determined fit. Now we're establishing some rapport with the supervisee. Chris is going to play the role of supervisor. I'm going to play the role of supervisee, and we're just going to give you some things to think about and watch Chris in his element because he does this all the time. So, Chris, thanks so much for being here. Anything you want to share with our viewers before we jump in?
Yeah, my name is Chris Campassi. I work at Firelight Supervision and Catalyst Counseling. So I do kind of half of my caseload each week is working with clients directly, and then my other half is working with supervisees working on licensure, interns, and also do some consultation for licensed therapists that might be experiencing burnout, compassion fatigue, or just need some support.
So people need to know who you are. This is why this video is going to be amazing. So thank you for all you do. All right, well, when you're
Super.
ready, I will drop into a supervisee role and let's show people how this could look.
All right. Well, hi, Khara. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I just, today's our first session and kind of a long process of your supervision towards licensure. So, with that in mind, I just always like to take some time up front to really kind of get to know one another, much like in therapy. Building that relationship with the client is really critical to the work you do. So I think that we should do that up front. Also want to kind of start with some just basic logistics, kind of similar to the first session with the client doing an intake, going through informed consent. So I want to go over some of those things, not the exciting stuff, but important to touch on and make sure that we're all on the same page with what we're doing and what our goals are here. And then I just really like to take the bulk of our time to just spend some time getting to know you and you getting to know me, and have a couple of questions that'll prompt us. So how does that sound?
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's get to the kind of not so fun stuff first. Just similar to therapy, this is a private and kind of personal relationship that we're going to have for a long period of time. And with that, we do have to kind of establish what our boundaries look like. And it's really important for me to really support your development over the next couple of years as you're working on your license. But I'm also tasked with, supervising the work you're doing with your clients, which means I do take on some responsibility as to the welfare of your clients. And so in that sense, there are times where I could potentially need to kind of intervene if I felt like there was any concerns that were endangering or could be harmful to the client. Otherwise, similar to therapy, everything that kind of happens between us and our supervision sessions are confidential. I would only share any information that came up in the event of an emergency and I did need to kind of intervene. A couple other things I like to just go over and just kind of make sure that you're aware. Sometimes people are just so excited to get finished with their masters, they don't even really think much further beyond that. And then all of a sudden you're at the beginning of a new process. So just like to clarify the requirements. So get your LPC in Colorado, you need to complete 2,000 complete total hours of work in no less than 2 years. It's funny to say it that way. You cannot do it in shorter amount of 2 years. So within 2 years or more, and 1,500 of those hours need to be direct. And concurrent to doing those hours, you also need to be meeting with me as your supervisor on a weekly basis if you want to do this in 2 years. I won't get too deep into the math, but there is kind of an art to managing the ratio between the number of clients you're seeing each month and the number of supervisions you need. But total, you need 100 supervisions, and 30 of those can be in a group. And that's something we'll talk about. I'll be actually starting a new supervision group. So if you'd like to join that, we could kind of 3 times a month meet individually and once a month meet as a group. And that's kind of a common practice. So I'm just curious, just check in real quick. Does that all fit with your understanding of kind of what the next couple of years look like?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you being able to help me dissect what Dora has said about supervision and the hours, because I think I've seen it discussed differently on different groups. And coming at it with a master's degree, I don't know what I don't know. I guess the only question I have, Chris, is what's direct? Like, how do I define direct hours for that 1500 that you were telling me about?
Yeah, yeah, good question. So direct hour is any hour that you're actually in contact with a client. So that could be a consult call, that could be an intake, or a session with any client.
Okay.
Versus that 500 non-direct hours are kind of paperwork, doing treatment plans, maybe making phone calls, professional development, a number of activities. And to be honest, I don't get too worried about that 500 hours because it's nearly impossible to get those 1500 direct without doing another 500 hours of some type of administrative work. So
Yeah.
we do have to track them, but don't stress on that. We'll
Okay.
focus on that 1500 hours of direct client work.
Yeah. So I had to track those things for my internship and my master's program. Is there something I should be doing to track those for you? Like, do you want them in a certain form or like a Excel spreadsheet or something?
Yeah, I actually have, fortunately, I have a very organized supervisee who put together a really nice tracking form that, and she's graciously allowed me to share it with other supervisees. So I can
Oh,
send that
awesome.
to you. And
Great.
it really breaks down, supervision hours, direct hours, and then those non-direct hours. And yeah, we'll always kind of check in. And I especially like to check in early in this process and just kind of look at how many hours you're getting compared to your supervision hours. So
Okay.
we'll work on that together. That'll be included in our supervision process. We'll always be checking in, making sure you're on the trajectory you want to be on.
Awesome. That sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that covers most of the kind of logistical stuff. I think just from an ethical standpoint, I think it's important to just note that, supervision is an interesting relationship in that you're going to probably be sharing a lot of personal things in this, process. And that's very appropriate, but we do need to kind of monitor this line between when supervision kind of turns into therapy.
Mm.
And I've found that a lot of people coming into this profession, it's a little bit difficult to know. Some people have maybe looser boundaries and are more likely to share a bunch of personal stuff. And I have to kind of monitor that and kind of determine, if I think maybe some of this work would be better done with your own personal therapist versus being brought into supervision. And then other people do the opposite, where they don't want to bring in anything personal, and they kind of have this idea that my personal world and my therapist professional world are completely separate. And I just think that's kind of impossible. Like we're humans and our personal stuff's going to always kind of jump into our work at times. We have our own stressors and our own life events to deal with. So I'll really keep an eye on that. But kind of my rule of thumb is typically that if the personal content that you're bringing in, the kind of you're sharing some context as to how an issue with a client is affecting you, or the emotions that it might be drawing up, or any counter transference that you're noticing, in those cases, it's really appropriate to kind of work through. These are feelings that are coming up. I don't need to know a whole lot of personal background, but a little context is certainly appropriate. And then we'll work through together how that's impacting you with the client. But we're really focusing on the client issue. And we're just acknowledging that this is impacting that work versus maybe those feelings are becoming so overwhelming that I can't even really focus on the client needs because I'm really needing to get support for what I'm going through. And in that case, if you're not already working with a therapist, I would recommend that you kind of reach out and find someone that you can do your own work with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that actually sounds pretty good because when I interviewed you, that was what I liked about you is that you made that distinction between therapy and supervision. Um, I know I mentioned to you briefly, but I think it's probably worth sharing that my supervisor in my internship did not have healthy boundaries with me, and I felt really uncomfortable, and it felt more like therapy than supervision, and I didn't consent to that. And so I really appreciate having some parameters of, yes, as my supervisor, I want you to tell me like, hey, I want you to work on this or go to your therapist and talk about that. Because I'm a green clinician, so I need that guidance, but I don't want you to be my therapist. And I just really appreciate that as a supervisor, you hold that distinction. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. I think it is important. And also, I do welcome and encourage you to feel comfortable to bring in some of those personal elements. And I will be the one that holds that line. I'm the one that's responsible. So, I want you to feel safe bringing it in because it really is a part of the developmental process. And it's better to be able to talk through these issues as they come up rather than kind of pushing them aside. And you'll find out through this profession that you push things away, they kind of slip in at the most inconvenient times and really kind of catch us off guard. So I'll keep an eye on that and we'll go from there. So I'd like to kind of, like I said, the next kind of most important part as we work together is just building our relationship, getting to know each other. We're going to work with each other for a long time, hopefully. And it's just best to take that time up front. And, similar to working with clients, I think it's really important to just kind of acknowledge how our identities impact, our perspective on the world and more specifically, how it can come into play with the work we do. And so I like to just model that up front. So I'd like to just talk about, what identities are important to you and how, they impact the work that you do and how they might show up in this relationship. But, as I say that out loud, I'm going to start that process myself. I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you to do that first.
Okay.
So, as you can probably see, I'm a white male. I am heterosexual and cisgender. And, I think it's really important to talk about these things openly, even though they're sometimes uncomfortable. That's not necessarily how I identify daily, but I do recognize that that's what most people see. And, there may be times where, working with a client or a supervisee, they may have experienced someone that looks like me in really negative ways, discrimination, oppression, or may have some really negative experiences with someone who looks like me. And I try my best to recognize that. I think that, and I'll also encourage this with you through your development, that the best we can do is to continue to be aware of these things and just hold ourselves accountable to continuing to work on understanding things we don't understand. And so, I think understanding culture and being culturally competent is really important. And also, I'm still a work in progress. I do my best to understand my own privileges. But I'm still a work in progress like most of us. Personally, I identify as an Army brat. I grew up in the military. I moved around a lot. I kind of think of myself as more a global citizen. I like to travel. I like to meet people. I like to learn new cultures and languages and just get to know people. And I found that really helps me in my work. Because it just brings out a natural curiosity. So that's just a little bit about me, and I just wanted to kind of check in with you, and if you're comfortable sharing some of your identities and how that might come up in your work as well as how that might come up with us.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I identify as, well, I'm Khara. I identify as female, cisgender, heterosexual relationship. I'm married. I'm a new therapist right out of my master's program. But probably the most important identity for you to know as my supervisor is I'm also a new mom. So in the midst of trying to get my hours towards licensure, I'm trying to balance being a mother, which is a new role for me. So I imagine that would show up for our work together, but also the client work of like, there might be times where my baby is sick or I need to stay home or I need to reschedule. And so I would appreciate any support you can give me around how to navigate that with clients without having to overly disclose of just like, they're important to me, but my child's also important to me. So any guidance you have for me on that path of balancing parenthood with being a therapist, I would appreciate.
Sure. And let me just full disclosure, I'm not a parent and I'm clearly not a mother. So I can only relate to to some degree. But I think this is just one example of many of the importance of prioritizing self-care and taking care of yourself. And, the one thing I say to that question of how to navigate it with clients is modeling self-care is one way we can be great therapists. And, many of our clients are dealing with some of these similar issues, and sometimes perfectionism and issues come up, and they sacrifice themselves for other people or for their job or for their kids, for whoever. And, sometimes it takes us prioritizing our own self-care to kind of model that for our clients. So, I always try to just have you think about it from that lens when these issues come up. But we're also going to be talking about that almost weekly, how you're doing, what's going on, time management. That's another responsibility of mine, is to make sure you're doing okay. I am responsible for your clients' welfare, but the way I work is actually, if I take care of you and make sure that you're healthy and developing in a way that's, good for you, then you'll be able to take care of your clients. And you'll see that a lot through our relationship, that's kind of the parallel process that you hear about supervision, where I work with you in a way that makes you feel safe and comfortable to explore and take risks, make mistakes. And in doing that, you can then model that for your clients and kind of carry that over into therapy.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, good. Well, another question I like to ask in our first session is just kind of a check-in, and you've already alluded to it, that it sounds like your experience in your internship supervision was not ideal. And so I like to ask the question, what's been your experience in supervision? What's worked for you and what hasn't? This just gives me an idea of what your experience is, so I can be mindful of that, but also gives me an idea about how you learn, how you digest information, and how you need to be supported.
Yeah, thank you. That's also one of the reasons why I picked to work with you, because you ask these questions. No one in my previous experience had asked kind of what I think you were saying is, what do I want in a supervisor, or what would be helpful in a supervisor? So I've only had two in my master's programs. I had a practicum supervisor and an internship supervisor. My practicum supervisor was amazing, very thoughtful, had really hard but meaningful questions to ask me, put me in, kind of threw my feet into the fire, if you will, just getting comfortable with clients. And then my internship supervisor just stepped over that line a lot, to the point where they were saying things like, Khara, you're too stoic, or Khara, you're too composed, we want you to cry. And I just didn't understand why that showed up in supervision. That's not something I don't want to cry at work. I don't know if I'm the only one, but that's just not who I am. And so I think right now what I'm looking for in a supervisor is somebody who can hold me accountable and help me grow, but also hold those boundaries, because it just felt like such a violation to have the supervision that I did before this. So somebody who can help me navigate how to write treatment plans, because I haven't learned how to write those yet. Someone who can help me. You mentioned time management, which I love. I'm going to have to be really good with time management to be a mom and pursue my hours for licensure. So someone who can help me learn how to write notes really efficiently, effectively would be great. But other than that, I think just consistency. If we're on the calendar, and obviously without baby being sick or something happening, just looking forward to doing the work and getting as much as I can out of supervision.
It's great. That's so great to hear. And that's part of the reason why, after meeting with you initially, I thought this would be a really good fit. And I want to just acknowledge that it doesn't sound like that supervision you experienced in an internship was very appropriate. And there's sometimes just supervisors that maybe aren't as experienced or aren't as strong at what they do. And so I just want to acknowledge that wasn't necessarily appropriate. And I'll definitely be mindful of how that might come up. And I just don't think that my style is anywhere near similar to that. What I hear is someone kind of trying to shape you into a therapist that was to their liking or what they believed you should be. And the work I do is actually quite the opposite. I like to really work from kind of your personality, your natural strengths, how you naturally engage people and help people. And then I like to kind of work from there. One of the things that we'll continue to talk about are theoretical orientation, theory of change, your style. who you are as a therapist. And so my role is not to mold you into what I think you should look like. My job is to really support you in the process of developing your understanding of yourself as a therapist, what theoretical orientation you kind of gravitate to. And on that note, I know that gets really stressful in school. They really hammer, what's your theoretical orientation? What's your theoretical orientation? And what I find is it's good in this process to take a step back. You're no longer being evaluated. You're not, you can take some time to figure this out, and we can work on that together. But what I like to do is, as you start to work with clients, we're going to talk about what you're doing in session naturally, what feels comfortable, what feels natural, what do you gravitate to? And then we're going to kind of look at the theoretical orientations and decide what matches. Because I think that when you connect your natural instincts to a theoretical orientation, it really forms a nice solid foundation to work from. Whereas I see some people who kind of pick one that sounds cool, and then they try to like develop a skill set to be that kind of therapist, but it's really inauthentic and not genuine to their self. So that's something you're going to hear a lot too. Like, let's go to your genuine self, Khara. Like, what does Khara think? What is Khara's intuition on this? And then we'll work around what interventions might be appropriate with the client.
That sounds awesome. All right, so I'm going to break character here. So for viewers, if you don't think Chris is amazing, you probably do now, because Chris is the supervisor I wish I'd had, because that part of that was my truth, right? Like as a clinician, having different kinds of supervision styles, like I didn't make that up. That actually happened to me, which is why I'm so passionate about quality supervision now and why we put videos together like this one. So some of you might be like, I need to work with Chris, which is awesome, and you should. But yeah, like how did that feel for you, Chris, to like model what it looks like? I mean, it sounds like this is pretty natural. You do this all the time with your current supervisees. Anything you want to emphasize here at the end of the video for our viewers?
Yeah, I think, again, it's much like the conversation I'll have with every supervisee about their clients. Like, just develop the relationship. Take the time up front to connect with your supervisee. If you're a new supervisor and you're feeling a little bit anxious, take time, slow down. It's the same thing I'll tell a supervisee who's working with a client. Take your time, slow down, get to know this person, develop the relationship. And then everything else can be figured out from there. If you jump in too fast, then it just really instills kind of a more frantic development process. So I would just say, take your time, get to know your supervisee, really develop that relationship.
I love that. So viewers, you're going to see more of Chris's face in more role plays. So stay tuned for more, because we're going to talk about goal setting and some other things. There's lots of different supervisors coming on for future role play videos. And Chris, thank you again for doing this one with me today. We'll see everybody next time.